Welcome to a noob's guide to SKulltaker. This is SKulltaker, which you likely already gathered from the myriad of human skulls he has clearly taken from somewhere else and chosen to adorn himself in. Where other Khorne demons embody their master's unending rage, SKulltaker, the Hero Slayer, is a manifestation of his pride, martial abilities, and insufferable alpha Chad nature. With SKulltaker fighting his way around the world and challenging worthy opponents to single combat. Because it's not a superiority complex if you're actually better than everyone. Many a mortal champion has awoken, put on their big boy pants, and left their castle, only to discover SKulltaker waiting outside. In this noob's guide, you'll find out who SKulltaker is and how he plays in Total War Warhammer 3. Here's a hint, he's the Kurgan from Highlander, traveling the world to duel people, chop off their heads, power up, and make money for the Krusty Krab at all costs. Part of the Omens of Destruction DLC, SKulltaker is a legendary lord of Khorne, the chaos god of war, anger, and leftover spirit Halloween decorations. But Khorne needs to keep his freaks on a leash, as it's often said that aspiring chaos champions have to be careful when trying to attract Khorne's gaze, that SKulltaker doesn't notice them first. SKulltaker appears outside Bretonnian castles, ogre feast halls, elf mansions, Nehekaran necropoli, and dwarf holds, and then stands out there in a trench coat with a boombox over his head, bellowing challenges and insults until someone is dumb enough to come out and fight him in single combat. The fights are always short, but not because SKulltaker kills them. Instead, he shatters their limbs and leaves them helpless, so that he can straddle them, grab their heads, and ignite them with his bare hand, searing off the flesh so that all that's left is a freshly bleached skull that he can snap free and add to his collection. He'll then repeat his say anything routine until someone else comes out to fight him, or until boredom sets in, as every villain in Warhammer has the attention span of a kindergartner who just drank a big gulp icy. SKulltaker seeks out only the most excellent warriors in the world. Sure, he'll kill anyone that gets in his path, but like the Predator, he only collects the skulls of true champions, which he then sews into his Cloak of Skulls, imbuing himself with a portion of their might, making SKulltaker uniquely a beast in the streets and with the sheets, and a sole representative of the underappreciated artistic side of Khornate demons. But in a crowded field of cranial carpenters and skull-thrown artisans, SKulltaker channeled his inner Tim Gunn to push the boundaries of noggin-based runway accessories. Because he didn't just like skulls, he loved them. Maybe a little too much. The end result is a cloak of many craniums, and a new mechanic that allows you to spend harvested champion's essence to empower SKulltaker's most prized pates. Not all heroes and lords on the map are worth the same amount of champion essence. And he would know. SKulltaker has spent an eternity studying skulls, measuring and comparing them to determine which skulls are best, and has even followed certain bloodlines in anticipation that they would one day present worthy skulls for him to harvest. Because leave it to the British to create a villain who invades foreign lands, kills the locals, brings their skulls back, and then uses them to study the pseudoscience of phrenology. Each skull on SKulltaker's Cloak of Skulls levels up like an old-school Blizzard RPG tree, where each node is connected to a previous node, and you choose which you want to invest more points into. Kakala, the greatest tomb warrior, starts with a level by default, and it's that skull which gives you the Blood God's Shackles army ability, which locks enemy heroes and lords in place so you can run them down like a deer caught in a suburban stepmom's SUV headlights. To ensure a swifter death than grill-based trauma, SKulltaker has the innate Bloody Onslaught ability, which you can press to temporarily reduce an enemy's melee defense and armor. Add in his quest item, the Slayer Sword, a blazing sword made from a single shard of Khorne's boundless wrath, and you'll start to look at every meat sack you encounter in the field as a skull begging for release, that even as the flesh recoils, gleefully leaps from its owner's torso. Another skull on his cloak even tracks how many faction leaders you kill and gives you progressively more buffs for each skull cap you doff. As you play, the Cloak of Skulls can turn SKulltaker into a broken demonic monstrosity, with the usual bonuses to experience, battle buffs, army replenishment, and instant transmitting across the map to appear behind enemy lords and make them a foot shorter. Though note, there is a cooldown on that last ability, and you need to already see the Lord on the map. This isn't some Dragon Ball level bullshit, though it is pretty close. SKulltaker's unique skill line is a mix of improving the Bloody Onslaught ability, giving him Terror, an AoE explosion to get out of blobs, and generally making him move faster while hitting harder, and doing the same to Bloodletters in your army to encourage you to recruit them. Because he's a Bloodletter Lord, and he recruits Bloodletters. But, as usual, it's SKulltaker's final skill that takes the cake, giving one inevitable end. A contact effect that stops all incoming healing on anything he hits, and 2, Executioner, which instantly kills other characters below 20% health as a passive.
Fatality.
But while SKulltaker is a proven performer, demonic Khorne armies have historically had difficulty keeping it up under pressure. But thanks to the new demonic reforging, you can be sure where all the blood goes for the Blood God, as it reuses the Vampire Count's Dead Rise Again mechanic. And I mean it literally reuses the same code. So with demonic reforging, some of your units will be dead, and then there will be a chance that they'll be not dead, which is not the same as undead, even though they use the same mechanic. SKulltaker, as a powerful Bloodletter demon, has a better chance of reforging Bloodletters after a battle, because again, he's a Actually, what SKulltaker is somewhat debatable. Warhammer's 7th and 8th editions, as well as the RPG, all describe him as a Bloodletter, a type of demon crafted by Khorne for his service. Lean, mean, and with swords bigger than Danny D on Viagra. And the books even say SKulltaker has a name, Uzul, which sounds a bit like a fancy macaroni, but it's still a name. Uzul is also the name of the demon trapped inside Archaon the Everchosen's cursed blade, the Slayer of Kings. And yes, I'm aware it's spelled Uzul and Uzul, which is just as different as...
It's not the same.
To confuse things even further, there was a book written about someone named SKulltaker called Blood for the Blood God, which told of a Kurgan warlord named Verkus, who impressed Khorne by standing outside a fortress and yelling for 2 weeks until its occupants got so annoyed they finally agreed to come out and fight him. This so impressed Khorne, he made him a demon prince, which just happened to look exactly like a Bloodletter, that he renamed to Uzul. And also, there was a sword with the Bloodletter trapped inside of it in that book that also somehow wasn't the one that Archaon had. Meaning, there's an above-zero chance that this is not the first Bloodletter named Uzul that Khorne has made. Probably because when you live a couple thousand years, it gets hard coming up with original names anymore. Just ask Roach in The Witcher. Speaking of trusty mounts, SKulltaker can go into battle atop one of the new altars of Khorne, or his juggernaut mount, Kultiran, which isn't a beast or a machine, but a demonically forged amalgamation of both, whose flesh is brass and body is pure fire, and whose soul screams out for the sweet release of death from this eternal agony. As usual, the Omens of Destruction DLC also comes with new units and lords available to other Khorne and Chaos faction lords, none of which are particularly important to SKulltaker's campaign, because he focuses on Bloodletters. There's Rictus Erectus from Mad Max, the new Blood Speaker Lord, who buffs nearby units a bit like a Chaos Warrior Priest. Blood Beasts, also called the Scylla the Magilla Gorillas that Mom says we have at home. Slaughter Brutes, whose overflowing, barely contained rage means they'll rampage if your lord dies in battle, so plan accordingly and pack a Snickers for if they get hangry. Khorngors, for when you need to Vanguard deploy a unit you don't care about to slow down an enemy long enough for your real units to get into position. Wrathmongers, dual hammer-headed, chain-whip-wielding crazies who blur the line between demon and demented human and are freaking cool, and their little brothers, Skull Reapers, who haven't yet figured out how to make that red paint stay on their skin in the subarctic weather. All of these units generally trade armor for aggression and are meant to dive into a pool of enemies and leave a bloody splash. As Khorne's chosen immortal champion, when SKulltaker is not at the head of the Blood God's army, he's wandering the world in search of its greatest warriors, and now you too can keep his millennia-long winning streak rolling in Warhammer 3. Though there is a mark against his 1 in a million fight record you should know about. SKulltaker once challenged Sigmar himself to a fight, and after a 3-day brawl across the World's Edge Mountains, he was left with a banishment hangover and a scar that does not heal. SKulltaker now goes out of his way to repay that debt against the Empire of Man whenever he can. Because, like all Warhammer Fantasy players, demons have long memories and little forgiveness. especially when it comes to the Age of Sigmar. So saddle up and snap some necks. Show the old world what it's like to ride red ruin across the countryside. Become a true SKulltaker, like the Predator, Highlander, and that villain from the 1996 Phantom film. Because if you're gonna collect skulls, you should only keep the best. Just ask the British Museum. Now go add to your collection, because this has been a noob's guide to Oozle the SKulltaker.